We also held our second NATO-Ukraine Council. We reaffirmed that Ukraine's future is in NATO. Our goal now is to create a bridge to Ukraine's full membership, offering additional support and greater cooperation as Ukraine makes the reforms necessary to join the alliance.
It's not necessary for Ukraine to join the alliance, not at all. I mean, it's just kind of shocking, honestly, all of this. Welcome back to the program. Dana Loesch here with you. That was Antony Blinken yesterday talking about the issue of Ukraine joining NATO. It's the craziest thing. U.S. and NATO officials were meeting in Brussels this week to discuss support for Ukraine. And after the meeting, Blinken told the press, quote, Ukraine's going to be a member of NATO. Our purpose, well, you heard him say it. Over a chapter and verse, there are a few pieces about this, including how War Inc. unveils plan to circumvent the voter, commander-in-chief, to fund forever war in Ukraine, because that's what they were discussing while they were over there. They were scared, they said, that they're nervous because they want to Trump-proof any kind of system they got going with funding Ukraine, nonstop forever war. And so they were trying to establish, they have the Ukraine Defense Contact Group that they created in spring of 22, and they were bringing together, these defense chiefs, etc. And Lloyd Austin apparently is in charge of it. The guy who just disappears and doesn't tell people that he's not coming into work that day. Lloyd Austin, the guy who was there overseeing Afghanistan and our disastrous exit, that Lloyd Austin makes you feel great, right, about the future of our country and all of our maneuvers and foreign policy. Just, such confidence. And now apparently this whole operation, it's Lloyd Austin, these NATO officials, they said that they're Trump-proofing it so that they can still have, they didn't say that verbatim, but that's what they're doing. They want to have this contract group it's essentially under a foreign power where you got money and munitions still going to Ukraine no matter who's in the White House. I mean, that's ultimately what it is. And so they met in Brussels. This was yesterday. Blinken goes out and tells the press this. There is zero benefit at all whatsoever. And this is the third thing of what I was telling you with these war drums beating. There's zero benefit at all whatsoever of Ukraine joining NATO. You don't bring your baggage into NATO. You don't have land disputes and try to bang on NATO's door, right? And think about this. If Ukraine is made a member nation, an attack in Ukraine would force World War III upon us quicker than you could blink. Their depletion of funds and munitions doesn't give them the right and isn't just cause for them to demand access to our taxpayer dollars and our American lives as resupply. We're not a blank check for Ukraine. We are not the pantry for Ukraine. You got college kids? You got college kids that go to college, they come back and they go shopping in your pantry? Okay, that's not Ukraine doing that to the U.S. We're not doing that. But that's exactly what they want to set it up as. I mean, this situation with Ukraine and the idea that, well, yeah, they could join NATO. Why should they join NATO? That was the red line, by the way. There was never any official agreement with Russia to not have other nations join NATO, this eastward expansion. There was never any official agreement where people signed. The only thing that Russia demanded, we don't want Ukraine to join. And I hate that you can't even have a conversation and get into the nuance of these issues without neocon PSYOP out there and War Inc. accusing everyone who doesn't join in with them and beating the war drums of being a Russian plant or Putin adjacent. I'm so tired of this stuff. We're more American than War Inc. is, but yet, this is what we got. You can't even ask questions. We literally had a war and overthrew a government because we didn't want to be dominated by a military. But nowadays we got War Inc. and the neocons telling us that we can't explore what's actually happening here and who's trying to manipulate us with what information and what's the veracity of this information without having our characters impugned and our patriotism questioned. I'm really tired of it. So Russia didn't want Ukraine to enter NATO. And I really don't know the purpose of NATO anymore, if I'm being honest. NATO, the idea that NATO, first off, is a threatening entity is ridiculous. NATO, and Trump expanded NATO, but it wasn't like these were all former Eastern Bloc countries that were begging to join NATO. That's the expansion of NATO. Okay. That's the expansion. So I don't see why that's, and a lot of these countries, in fact, the biggest members, if you remember, Trump had a huge argument with Angela Merkel that one photo where he's sitting at the table with his arms crossed and she's glaring at him because he was demanding that they spend the bare minimum percentage of GDP on their own defense. That's the thing. In order to be in NATO, you have to spend a certain percentage of your GDP, just making sure that you can handle your own business, okay? And they were grinding their teeth at having to do that. NATO is a welfare purse for Europe. That's what it is. I don't feel bad in saying such because it's true. The United States is supposed to finance everything. The United States is supposed to provide the muscle, the bulk of everything, and then we're supposed to hand it off to foreign commanders, for the sake of, sharing and cooperation. So it's not a threat. And I don't think Russia's a threat either because they're broke as all get out. They're running a war of attrition right now in Ukraine because they have the people to feed through the machine. Although they're running out of young people, so they're having to draft the old ones. The idea that they are some sort of imperial threat like the days of yore is something that War Inc. tells itself to help itself fall asleep at night so they can have good dreams. The biggest threat is Imperial China. If you want to discuss who has imperialistic tendencies and desires, it's China. But for whatever reason, we keep having to go back and say it's Russia. You don't have to like Russia, and you can still think they're commie as the day is long, because they are. But that doesn't mean that they have imperialistic tendencies that they're trying to force over on the rest of the world. I'm just going to say it. Why am I supposed to care about a territorial dispute all the way over there? This is where geopolitics, this is where people who get it and people who don't, this is where it's evident. I don't care about your feelings. I don't care about your I don't care. This is about the interests of the United States of America, and literally nothing else matters in the realm of geopolitics. Nothing else matters. What does it benefit? I had Nikki Haley on the show back when she was still running, and she was trying to tell me that Russia was very concerned about eastward expansion, and they didn't want NATO countries on their borders. And I'm like, now, you were in the United Nations. The Baltic states are NATO members, and they are Latvia, Estonia, and they're on Russia's borders and have been. Are people counting on all of you not knowing basic geography? I don't get it. But they're trying to tell us that, oh my gosh, Russia just wants to conquer everybody else. I don't buy that. I don't believe it. Again, I think that's a neocon War Inc. argument. And the problem, the countries that have been added into NATO, these militaries are tiny and they're not well funded. I mean, good grief, their defense overall is small and not well funded. If anything were to happen, it would be the U.S. and it would be France and Germany and Britain. That would be, or the U.K. That would be the entities that they are demanding that everybody help them out. Like Turkey, good grief. And I don't even know if you could have a good defensive front with NATO, because there's some political realities that make it difficult. This whole thing, though, with the expansion of NATO and everything else, again, all of that is Eastern Bloc countries that were begging to be included in NATO. NATO didn't go out and wage a war and take over land. They didn't do that. Now, I do think that Russia has been expanding. I think that they have puppets, and they're causing chaos in Moldova. Then you have Belarus, where they have a puppet in place there, and they did they took over the Georgian region. But the idea that I think that they would extend beyond that, I don't buy it. Here's the other question too. What is the interest in the United States for the United States in Ukraine joining NATO? They're broke. Their military is depleted. What's in it? What do we get out of it? If you can't ask that question, you should not be involved in the negotiations of NATO. You shouldn't be involved in the negotiations in a geopolitical forum, period. Because those are the types of questions that you have to ask. You're there for one reason only: to advance the interests of your country. And what do your people get out of it? This isn't welfare. Wrong W. It's war. Or at least making sure that we have good footing. I don't want to go to war with anybody. I don't like war. I am anti-war. War is a last resort with me. But if you I'm the person, I'm anti-war, but if we have to be drugged into war as a last recourse, I want everything destroyed for generations in advance. I want everything turned to glass. I want to take over the land and turn it into a parking lot and watch Joni Mitchell cry. I don't care. That's what should happen. If you're going to do it, then you go all in so that everyone else is too terrified to ever risk having another one again. I just don't know. I really wish, because I still think that China is the biggest threat. And this is what, we don't get discussions out of this administration. We're not making any overtures to India. India displaced China as the most populous country. Their birth rate is exceeding that of China. I was having a conversation with my son about the birth rates of different nations and how, there's really only a handful of nations, including Pakistan and India, that are actually maintaining and going above their birth rate, and everybody else is falling dangerously, abysmally low. U.S. is barely maintaining it. Italy's fallen below. China's desperately fallen below. Russia's fallen below. That's why they implemented this national program to get more people to have kids. Hungary was the same way. It's welfare. We tried that here in the U.S., and it worked spectacularly, didn't it? That's why I don't understand why some conservatives are wanting to do it here. But millennials. But this India displacing China, India could be a great ally. I don't know why this administration is not making more overtures to India. If you're going to admit a country, and have, make it countries that can bring something to the table. Otherwise, what's the purpose of NATO? It's a clique of people, half of whom can barely pull their own weight, and they all look to three countries to bail them out every single time. It sounds mean, but I don't care. That's the truth of it. Oh, but you can't talk about it because if you talk about NATO being ineffective, that's Russia adjacent. It's not Russia adjacent. It's a condemnation of leaders who want to avoid culpability and they want to avoid the consequence of their own poor leadership and bad actions, and so they're going to blame the people rightfully questioning them. And questioning their patriotism by saying you're aligned with the enemy because you point out our mistakes. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I'm all for let Ukraine fight and do whatever they're going to do. We have no business being involved in it, and we definitely have no business admitting Ukraine to the clique. The clique that has never won an inch of land by conquering it. The clique that half of the countries in there can't even pull their own weight militarily or with defensive spending. And what has it done? I don't get it. It's a remnant of the Cold War. And we need to, in this new era, refine our thinking a little bit. And I think we need to shift our perspectives and look at the bigger enemy here, which is Imperial China. That is a threat. People are not taking it seriously enough, at least in the Biden administration, because they seem to think it's totally fine. You can tell, look at this. They talk this game about Russia, but then they immediately, oh no, Taiwan, we don't recognize it as its own country. I told Kane on break, something's got them spooked. Something has them spooked.